Hi, everybody. Tina Brock, producing artistic director here at the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium in Philadelphia. I'm your host for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. I do hope you'll join us the next 50 minutes. Sit back and relax as we explore the lives, the hearts, the minds, and the spirits of creators in Philadelphia region and around the world. Thank you for joining us here on Into the Absurd. I'm your host, Tina Brock, producing artistic director at the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium theater company here in Philadelphia, along with my trusty colleagues, Erica Holscher and Bob Schmidt. And we're very excited you joined us today. If you're coming in on Facebook Live or on Zoom in the Zoom dining room, thank you for being here for a conversation with Jeanette Jimenez and Katie Tackman of the Alexander Artway Archives. We are going to be celebrating 1 year next Saturday, and it's so delightful that you've been here with us this whole time. And I use the word delightful just to say that we couldn't have done it without you. And it's been a place to park this boat every Saturday, get to know people in our community, and you've been a huge part of the success of the show and for keeping it going. So we just, from all of us here at the IRC, thank you so very much for making it all happen. On today's show, Jeanette Jimenez and Katie Tackman. Jeanette is the daughter of Alexander Artway, and his photography, of which I am sitting in front of, his spectacular representations of New York City and many places around the world we're going to be seeing more about today. And we're going to talk about Jeanette's journey to make, to put the pieces of her family puzzle together with her father's photography, and Katie Tackman, who comes into the picture with her background from Drexel University in photography and helping to curate all this. So let's bring Jeanette and Katie to the table right now and begin to tell the story of the Alexander Artway Archives. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you, Jeanette and Katie, for being here to tell this wonderful story. Jeanette, we've known you as an IRC audience member for many years and an enthusiastic supporter of the company. And I think you reached out specifically after a recent episode when Emily Bruton Schilling was on talking about the art of her father, James Bruton. And you communicated that you had a story that is very similar in its trajectory. And so we're here to talk about the art of your father today. And I'd love to start at the beginning with the suitcases of his many pieces of art that you discovered on his passing. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Thank you very much for having us. First, I would like to thank you for all this work, all this year and all your life here with us in Philadelphia. But also, I would like to say that what the story that we're telling will be useful to everybody, even with different mediums or different collections, because we will probably all be left something that we don't know what to do with. And if we don't think carefully, it'll be thrown away and will not lead us on a very interesting journey that would tell us an awful lot, much more about the things than the people who own them. So with that, my story with this began actually when I was 21 years old by 1 month, and now I'm almost 79. So it began by my knowing that my father had 2 suitcases in his closet filled with photographs that he valued. He did not show them to me except twice in my life because he showed them to tell me that I had these relatives in these suitcases. Okay, well, up until 20 years old, who pays attention? So, and even though he was a photographer, there was only one picture of his up in the house. And that picture was his college graduation from NYU that he took himself. So I knew it was him. I knew what it was. And I knew that he took it himself. And I think it was put there to tell me, no, if I did this, you got to do it too. So I think it was very clever of a father.
Were you following? So you weren't following him along as he was photographing, or you weren't a part of that process?
Not for those 2 suitcases. I had another sort of boxes here and there where he took me as a child. Right, he took 1,000 pictures of me as a child in different ways, but those other 2 I knew were either old, relatives from Russia where he came from, or New York. Right.
So he came from Russia in the early 1920s.
Yeah, I'll tell you. But anyway, the process begins like if I don't have these two suitcases, I don't have any of what I'm going to tell you, right? And I had an hour to get out of the house due to some family problem. He died of a sudden heart attack. I had an hour to get out because my mother was coming. I got a letter actually from a lawyer on a Friday at 5 o'clock. You know, when the lawyer sends you those letters you cannot respond to. In those days, the phones were barely working, and no, not many people had them. So I figured, okay, I get this letter at like 4 o'clock, and I know that like something that 5 is dangerous. So I filled up my father's car with things. So I'm thinking, my first question I asked myself is, what matters to him? I thought everything in this household that matters to me, I can replace, but I cannot replace what matters to him, right? So I grabbed those 2 suitcases with a few other things, and my girlfriend Gina, and the dinner we were cooking at the very moment, because Gina refused to leave without her chicken and spinach, right? And we filled up the car and off we went.
So I just want to clarify, you had an hour to gather anything you needed from the premises,
right?
And would not be able to get back in?
Right. Well, I would have to bump into a whole shebang of problems. By that time, my mother was one of these, I hate the word declutterer, because it meant that this would all be in the trash. I knew that. So I took the 2 suitcases. At that time I had rented like a room. I could not fit the suitcases in the room, basically, because I barely lived in this room on 3rd and Pine for $35 a month. And my girlfriend Gina had a bigger room. So we put the suitcases there, and there they stood for like a year or 2. And this went on. The suitcases traveled with me from my 1 month into the year 21. And I didn't open them up until 2012. So this was 1963, my father died, and the suitcases were just going from place to place. Wherever I went, they went, right? And that means a lot of different cities in the country. I don't think they went out of the country, although I went sometimes to Mexico, went a lot of places, but they all just stayed bang in the suitcase. But I got robbed a lot of times because I didn't have the kind of, rent that I was paying in expensive places. And even there you get robbed. So the suitcases were opened up many times, and because people were robbing like jewelry or silver, they didn't want it. Nobody wanted the photographs. So they would just flip them out on the floor. And my father's whole careful arrangements and everything were gone. But I forgave myself. I said, your job is to save them, and that's it right now. So finally it dawned on me to change the suitcases, to get them out of those suitcases, because they were all going. They wanted the suitcases. They didn't want the photographs. So they went to Rochester, Minnesota. They went to Chicago, a lot of places.
But weren't you curious to open them up throughout those years?
No, I was petrified. I had because when there's a lot of ghosts in there, there was too many ghosts to touch. Right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Right. I said, forget it. Yeah. And every time I picked them all up off the floor and put them all back together, and they were all mishigosh here and there. But I said, my job is to save them.
Wow.
In 2012, that's when I opened them up. And I said, I have to do something, because now I'm at the other end of the game and I have a whole house full of stuff, right? And I figured, again, these are going to go right in the trash.
Was there a part, so Katie, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here in terms of you as a background in photography and a fine art printer, and explain a little about how you're supporting the archives and what you felt when you saw this collection for the first time.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of artists in Philadelphia, helping them with printing and archiving, scanning, photographs, original artwork. So my friend, the photography community in Philadelphia is pretty small, and we all kind of know each other, or, a friend of a friend. So Alice, who was Jeanette's neighbor, I guess.
Yeah, Alice Cutler.
Neighbor. We worked together, and we would always talk about photography, and she told me about Jeanette's project. And I was really interested because I've always been into historical photos, processes. I used to volunteer at the Seaport Museum and love looking into like old collections of photographs. So when I saw the photos, I feel like the ones that stood out to me were of Alexander Artway traveled so much because he was a merchant marine, and so he went to all these different countries and would take beautiful photographs. But then the ones when he came back to New York, it's like maybe like a photographer's dream. Like you come back to New York, live in the city, photograph amazing places, and it's sort of like I don't know, it just spoke to me in that way.
Mm-hmm. Jeanette, so your father went to NYU and graduated with a degree in architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're left with these suitcases that you literally moved from place to place. When was it that you decided to start to formally archive all this and get Katie involved and try to, well, can you tell your story about Time magazine? Because I think that's
I looked
really
in
fun.
there, I looked in these suitcases and I saw I knew who was my grandmother, and I was taken aback. I actually have her picture here. I was taken aback, and I was told all the time that I looked like her. I don't know if this goes in there or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you can see them.
Yeah. And I was fascinated sort of, I thought, she always looked so together. I thought, well, if she could do this much with a family that was in the middle of the war, I could do something. And I just that day, I'd gotten Time magazine, and Vivian Mayer was on the front cover, who was a photographer in Chicago. And I had actually taught in Chicago for a year, right about whatever time that was, or maybe before. So I said, these photographs look a lot like mine. She used to have, she was a nanny, and she took the kids in Chicago. She had to babysit all day long, right? She was from France, but she lived in this one room from this one family. And then she would move all her stuff to the next family when the kids grew up. So in order to amuse the children, she'd like put her purse with a camera in it, and she'd take the kids to the stockyards with all the cows and all the wild things, right? So she had these photographs, and I looked at them and I said, they look like mine. So I saw who the gallery owner was who was showing them, and I called him. His name was Stephen Kasher. I figured, you start at the top. What's the difference? You could always say, get out of here, right? So I said that I had these photographs and so forth and so on. And this is before they were on the internet. He had no idea what I was talking about. But there was a big photographic show at the present time, which I knew nothing about, called APAD. And he said, well, I'm going to be here in New York. It seems his wife was from Philadelphia, and he had some interest sort of with Philadelphia. And also, I think he was Russian Jewish, and my father was Russian. So he thought, okay, he said, come in and show them to me. But I knew that you weren't supposed to do that because they were selling. I wasn't supposed to bring my stuff. He said, well, here's my private number. You call me and I'll take a look. So I lugged one album over there up to New York. And he sat down in the middle of the whole place and sat down for an hour and a half, and he looked very carefully. And he said, these are very, very good. That's the first time I heard any kind of judgment on the photographs. He said, these are very, very good. And he sent me over to somebody named Stephen Bolger from Canada, who's down at the other end of the aisle. So I went to Stephen Bolger, and Bolger looks at them and says, these are very, very good. This is my second very, very good, right? Then he says, I'm going to be in Philadelphia to see Peter Barbary over at the Art Museum. I said, oh, well, I have a real big house. You can come stay in my house, right? Which he did, right? And then he looked at all the photographs that were just piled up here. There was no organization like this.
So you're in your house right now, in the studio, in the same house that you were in, and your father's photographs are behind you both.
Right, but they weren't so fancy in here. He had to like go through the, albums and all
the suitcases,
the whole thing. And then he said, well, I don't know about this. He says, I don't think this is, for me. He says, I don't know what I'm going to, I don't think so. He says, okay. He says, I have to go up to the museum and see Peter Barbary. So when he goes to see Peter Barbary at the Art Museum, he was selling Peter Barbary something from somewhere else in Canada or something. And then he goes to Peter Barbary, and he tells Peter Barbary, who I've tried to talk to before. I sent like 5 emails showing my work, but of course, Peter never gets them. The secretaries get them. That's the other moral to learn here. Don't take no for an answer, because it's most likely they didn't even see it themselves, right? So, and the secretary kept writing to me saying, oh, these are wonderful. She says, but I don't know. I can't get him to look. So Peter gets to know about them from Stephen Bolger. And then Peter comes to see me, and then since you know how men are, you know, like sort of who's is bigger, pardon my French, right? And then all of a sudden, Stephen gets more interested, right?
Ah. They are good, very, very good now.
All of a sudden, Stephen, you know, a little time goes by. Peter Barber is starting to think about them for his museum. Then Stephen comes back. Oh Lord, this is going to be right out in public too. Oh Lord. Anyway, so Stephen comes back and he says, yes, these are very good. And he decides to take on some. And he took about 60 of them and he took them to Canada and he takes very good care of them and he lists them properly and so forth and so on. And he shows them at APAD. And so that's how I got that particular
Very interesting. You picked up the phone and called time.
Right.
I think that's why not, Jeanette. I'll remember that always. Start at the top. And if I will, Bob will post some links over in the chat for people to go be able to visit the archives on the website and be able to see much more there. Are they, Jeanette and or Katie? Can you tell me about? Okay, let me put this one over to you, Katie. You know why? So it seems like there's two stories here. There's the one of Jeanette finding her family and finding her family roots, a la sort of, you know, finding your roots on the Antiques Roadshow. And then there's the sort of your photographic eye, which is, you've talked about the deep psychology that you see which is apparent in the photos on the website of his subjects, which, you know, as a photographer, how does one pull that out of a subject? Do you wait? Do you set up and wait? Is there something about, because it's striking, I felt, in his subjects.
I think, well, going to school for photography, one of the first projects, you know, you'll get is do a self-portrait. And I think that really puts you in tune with like how to pose someone or like how, you know, you look at yourself. And in that way, it helps you pose other people or just see other people's expressions or movements in a certain way. So I think Alexander Artway took so many self-portraits or like selfies, as you would maybe call them today, which is interesting because he did it all on film and, you know, he had to set up a tripod and the camera and do it in public, which is another aspect of a self-portrait that's interesting. And so I think also a lot of his portraits were in Russia or Belarus, as it is now. And he was looking sort of for his family, which kind of what Jeanette's doing now is like, she's looking through these photos to find her family members today. So maybe that connection with the family is, he got different like sort of expressions and poses from them maybe.
It seems like it's a very deep understanding of it's striking what the story that comes through the photos. So Jeanette, can you explain about how you were able to have the exhibit in Belarus?
Well, again, you just sort of go a little baby step by baby step, and it talks to you. You know, when you do something like this, you don't really philosophize about it. In the middle of the night, you get these like vibes, like something. So Katie came. She was really good with this. At first, Alice Cutler did it. And then Katie came and I think Alice also put them on the website. And Alice, you know, we had an Instagram and all that. And then in 2018, when I was leaving from Florida, all of a sudden I get all this information on the web, on our email from Russia. So I, of course, think we're getting hacked. I don't speak Russian. I don't know a single word, right? I think, oh no, now we're going to do this whole, you know, hack job, right? Now what are we going to do? So my husband was very sick at that time, actually, and even died a few days later. He said, no, could be something, could be something. So I paid no attention to it. And then more of it kept coming in, you know, from Russia, from this place called Gomel. And of course, you know, they would use Google Translate, which gets all a little nutty. But eventually it seemed that it was real. and we were only going to give them scans, and it was my father's birthplace.
And what were they were asking for photographs? Is that what they wanted?
They said that they looked on the Instagram and everything. These two scientific researchers, one was an art historian, one was a historian, from a museum called Paskevich Romensa or something like this, but a big fancy, museum in Gomel, actually in Gomel. Now Gomel's not that large back then, and I thought, this is odd. And they said that I had historic photos that they didn't have, that because of the war, everything was destroyed. So we scanned about 70, 75, and we sent them over. And I was planning to go as an opening for the show, but ironically, I couldn't go because of the pandemic and possible war with Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened when my father left. My father left exactly 100 years ago, and the same thing was a pandemic and a war. So I sent a video. And then they had a show, and in this country, we don't have to pay for anything for the show. They put the whole thing up. They did all the paperwork, and it stayed up. It went up in September, and I think it just went down a couple of weeks ago.
September of 2019 or 2020? 2020, right.
20 time, yeah.
So Katie, were you a part of, how much art did you have to ship them? Or did you just do it all digitally?
Yeah, we just sent them, I scanned, about 75 photos, and then we just sent them, and they made a presentation in one of their galleries. And it was interesting, the pictures they were interested in, because I would look at them and say, oh, this is not a very unique building in Gomel. And I don't know if they would want that, but I just sent them everything that I knew was from Gomel, and they were very excited about it, and I wanted more of the buildings because they didn't have any photos from this time period, which was
because of the war. You see, Hitler came through Belarus to enter Russia, and Belarus has a huge forest that everybody said, don't go in there, it's full of ghosts, right? And that's where a lot of war was going on. But the interesting story was that when my father went twice and was put in jail also when he went back. He came from Gomel through Europe, through Serbia, into America around, he enters Ellis Island in 1922. Then in 1927, he becomes a citizen enough to go back to see his mother. So we have two sets of photographs, one from 1927 and one from 1937, right? And 37 was very different from 27. So when they went up in the museum, I had no idea to find relatives, and I knew not one word of Russian. My father told me I was not to even bother to learn Russian, that I was American. So when the photographs all went up, the family and so forth, the classic picture of the family, that nothing was happening, relatives. I wasn't looking for relatives. It was sort of historical, right? And they were thrilled because my father wrote the names of streets, and those streets are not there anymore. And during the war, they changed the names, like the Red Army Street or something. And then the wonderful curator decided to put them, and the place where that museum was actually very close to my father's land. It was almost on my father's land. Like I had pictures of that museum from then. That's how close it was. So he decided to write it in the paper that this was coming, this show was coming. And some daughter-in-law from one of my relatives brought it to a relative of mine and said, isn't this your name? Isn't this you? And they pranced down to the museum, about 4 or 5 of them, carrying an album with the same photographs, about 20 of the same photographs. And I'm wondering how during this war, I heard such stories during the war, how did they keep them? What did they do? I mean, really, everything was destroyed. My father's land was a big hole. So it seems that this particular aunt of mine, who's dead, of course, this is like her 3rd descendant down or something. She put them in a crock. She wrapped the crock in something, right? They took out the insides of the sewing machine. They put them in the sewing machine, and then they buried the whole sewing machine in the earth. When they came out of the forest, barely alive, anybody, right? They went back to their home. The whole home area was a big hole, except where the sewing machine was. I guess because there was something heavy in it in the bottom. They dug it out, and there were the photographs. And they came to the museum with this album, and they held it side by side.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And they had been looking for my father, different generations and so forth. And because the men all died in the war, my father would have been gone. What happened was you had to trace through the female lines, and the female lines are always getting married with a different name.
Right. Yeah.
I am absolutely advocating that we don't just keep changing those names like that, because then you're stuck.
You're stuck. I found, yeah.
And the women are the ones reproducing. So
Yeah,
every child can have their mother's name. It's very simple.
I ran into that problem as well. And so Jeanette, well, Katie, would you say it?
I never had them. I thought I was an orphan. I have them in Moscow, and everybody's on Viber. There's only one that really speaks English, though.
So there's a couple questions. Katie, would you say that it's fair to credit social media with making this next journey in finding your roots happen?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a way people can find like clues and links to your family. Like I think we follow a bunch of Belarus Instagram accounts, and there's some that post old photos, and I'm like, oh, that looks similar to the Artway. Maybe that was in Gomel also. So you find different names and people, different resources, different like historical societies. So we were trying to do online with the ancestry.com, but it's so hard because there aren't as many records from Europe on there. So you really have to go a little deeper into like the historical societies, and these researchers that we were working with had a lot of knowledge, and actually one of them got arrested, I think, because of all the things that are going on in Belarus right now, and a lot of art projects and theater actually is being sort of shut down by the government there, and people are being arrested for different art projects. So everything going on there, it keeps coming up in the news, and I'm like, oh, what's going on in Belarus? Is this like a weird connection?
And the show was very successful.
They kept prolonging, even during the pandemic. And they were fascinated because they're standing on the same ground, and they didn't know that these things were there. Like there was a statue of Lenin with his fingers like this, pointing toward the church, and everybody knows that Lenin was an atheist. Like, why would it be pointing to this church? Like, and the church is gone, and Lenin is gone, and everybody's gone, and now it's like something else, and they have no idea. Then we got all kinds of information. They wanted older pictures to see the older churches and all that kind of stuff. It was quite it's a real cross-cultural exchange thing going.
And Katie, earlier we were talking a little bit about, I was interested in your interest in historical photography, and given the shot that I'm sitting in front of here on the set, do you have any more information about this one in particular?
Do we, other than that it's Times Square?
yeah, it's just early Times Square near. But you were
focused a lot on architecture because he was an architect himself. So, and I think there's a lot of correlation between Russian art and American art at the time. Like you'll see a lot of like sort of Russian constructivist themes throughout his work. And photography at the time was like just beginning as an art form. So, the different angles that he has of some architectures more interesting than you might see usually. And then like one of his shots of Grand Central, it's like just classic, like the light shining through, and just very like geometric sort of shapes that come in. But at the time, all these skyscrapers were going up, and he was photographing them, and yeah, I think just the element of architecture in his work is really important. Just him being an architect himself.
Mm-hmm. Do you see, either Jeanette or Katie, a big difference in what he photographed when he was in Russia versus, I mean, was it mostly architecturally driven in New York and more people focused and family focused in Russia? Although you said there were many pictures of buildings that they were very interested in because for record keeping.
It's true. It's much more family in Russia. I think for me, which was so interesting, is that, you really find a journey. Who is your father?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't know when you're 21 who is your father. You think you do, but you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was really a swan song to him when he sees in 1937 that he can't ever go back, and he gets information that his mother dies in 1940. And I think that's what made him decide to stay here and to have a family. And I'm born in 42. I can see that. And then he throws his whole life into like family. And I think he kept going back to see, well, he went twice only, which was a big deal. He had to go on the fancy liners to Brenner and all that, those fancy, boats that went. And I think he was soul searching. And also, I think he was very lonely in New York because he takes probably like a lot of Russians like snow, and he would go out all the time when it was snowing, and he would go with this one particular woman named Lena. Lena was the sister-in-law, the sister of his sister-in-law, and she had come from some part of Hungary, which we're researching now, and we have a lot of pictures of her, and we're actually thinking of seeing if we can do the same thing again. It seems that in Zagreb, we have a picture of Zagreb. And in Zagreb, there's a museum called the Museum of Broken Relationships. And you can put anything you want in it, but you have to put a story. So we have found a few pieces of paper that show where my father got his photographs printed that is not far from Zagreb. So we're trying to make a pilgrimage now to Hungary, and be our luck that they have an autocratic dictator now too. So we're going to have to skirt that one around, right?
You'll get through, I have no doubt. Jeanette, she will just be there making it happen. So it's a real place, the Museum of Broken Relationships. Yes. And in order to be, you just have to submit something, a story, a piece of art.
Something.
It could be an object.
We had one in Los Angeles, but it closed.
Oh, really?
Doing good business there. So just today we got an email from a friend who I knew here, who is an actor actually, who used to be working with the Actors Lab, and he's about 85 or so. And I just got an email today that, he has a place in Hungary. So who knows, he is Hungarian by nature. So things just work out. I mean, you could have the most preposterous idea and something happens.
But I love that it's driven, it's driven by the fact that you're open to whatever comes your way, Jeanette, in terms of making it happen, which is, that's a very important piece of the puzzle, is that you're willing to consider any signal that comes in, and or put your own signals out there to see if they're picked up. And I guess
because of the team, not me.
Yes. I mean, it certainly feels like yeah.
Jeanette always comes up with these grand ideas, and then I have to figure out how to make it happen.
That's where you come in, Katie, right? Right, because
really, in the beginning, I didn't know what to do, but my friend Christina, whose picture is actually up on the wall there, Christina and my friend Erica, they're the ones who, Erica's a historian, Christina's an author and a researcher, and they're the ones who say, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. And now we have...
What's the blah, blah, blah part?
I don't know. They just go with the flow.
Well, yeah, whatever you say, Jeanette. Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
No, but everybody has a strength. Just like when I taught in my classroom. Mm-hmm. It's like the time of Miss Jean Brodie. Everybody has a strength. It doesn't matter. And you use those strengths. And they're like, we have an interpreter. I don't know how we found somebody who speaks Russian from Ukraine living next door. And we found it's like that.
Yes.
It's the team. It's really the team.
Is it fair to say then, Jeanette, your journey here has been about finding your relatives, finding your roots, and finding your
But I didn't
family.
expect
What's
I
that?
never expected it. I never expected it.
Well, when like I'm going back to that sort of first time you opened the suitcase and you took the risk to see the phantoms that were within, what were you thinking was going to be your next step? Just, yeah, what were you thinking?
Well, I probably have a long time not to do anything until something comes my way. I had no idea. I was thinking to go to Russia. I was supposed to close and open the show, right? I
Mhm.
wanted to see my relatives. I wanted to look around, take everybody with me, of course. My relatives said, "Oh, you're welcome to come and stay. Bring whoever you want." Well, little does she know, it's 5 people,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Well, do you think what piece in there, Katie, through your association and understanding and knowing Jeanette, is about um, getting the artwork out there to a wider audience, or is that not really
Yeah.
the goal?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few pieces that the PMA, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, collected, and just meeting different curators and learning about, like we've gone to different art fairs and photography fairs, and just learning about like vintage photography is interesting, a very niche like thing to collect, or so it's more about showing the artwork and showing the photos and like selling anything.
Mhm. So, Jeanette, are you feeling as though for the archival part of it, I guess the question still remains, what will you do with the works themselves?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you what helps us, and I think this is important for everybody to know. Everyone is going to inherit some kind of photographs they're not going to know what to do with. And they're going to like throw them in a corner somewhere, and they're going to land in some thrift shop in a great big tub. And your grandmother and grandfather is going to be right in their tub with everybody else's grandmother and grandfather, right? So there's a group called APAG, the American Photographic, what is it?
Archives.
The American Archive Group of, well, say it again,
Mhm.
APAG,
We'll
Yeah.
put it up there too, so
Right.
people can see.
American Photography Archive Group.
That's
Yeah.
it, American Photography Archive Group. And they have helped us so much. I mean, they have Mary Orkin, who's the daughter of Ruth Orkin and Morris Engel, who are two big photographers, but wonderful photographers. She devoted herself to, it's a nonprofit, it's not expensive, because that's the other thing. This stuff can get very expensive. Everybody says you have it appraised. Well, who can have it appraised, really? So you get the help to do this. And then you go to these meetings together sometimes and you get ideas. Oh yeah, I could do that. Oh yeah, how about that? And you kind of think of like, just like you build your wardrobe or your garden or something. You think, yeah, there's something going on in New Orleans. Let's see what we got down there. And you learn a lot about all these other countries and things.
Have you personally felt some, I don't say closure, but some, maybe closure is a word, for finding more out about your family? Do you feel that you have, you mentioned in the beginning when the suitcases, you had an hour to get the suitcases out and you took the things that you were very important to your father. Do you feel you've done right by that?
Oh yes, I think I've done right. And the other thing we did, my father built a dacha, very in Browns Mills, New Jersey. And we have shown in Browns Mills in the cranberry and blueberry bog. So we're not just looking for big time stuff. And the people came from there and they saw I mean, what changes in a tree or a beach, really? But they saw the main beach, like, well, my father was there before I was born. So you're talking about 75, 80 years ago. And it brought such a joy to them to see their place old and established and, still there. And so that we would do that. And sometimes I even land funny places. I don't know, I land anywhere. Like the other day, I don't know, I was in the middle of something called Otrada, which is way up in somewhere in North New York, around Nyack and all those places. And in the woods, there's a bunch of, older Russian people who are, living together in these small little houses, remembering the olden days. and they're crying watching these photographs. And then one time I landed in the New York Public Library to give a lecture. Do I know what I'm talking about? No.
But wait, you don't just land there, Jeanette.
I do.
But well, I mean, you do, but you are actively seeking out these places to share the photography with populations, correct? You're not just like pulling up and knocking on somebody's door and be like, hey, you want to see my photos?
It's so beautiful to see people relate, and you can tell like who wants it, and there's just a certain way. Like,
but you're doing all this legwork, is that correct?
I'm not that energetic.
But I mean, this is an organized thing, is it correct? I mean, you're going and finding people in the places where these photographs would mean something.
I don't know.
I mean, how did you end up near Nyack? Did you just get in the car and go up there, or and just stop? And
some woman somebody found me in New York who was an immigration specialist. Victoria Krashenko found me, actually, and she was an immigration specialist. And by the way, I went to Temple and I studied like the history of the art. Now I'm studying Russian. But one thing leads to the next. And
right.
She was going up there, and I went with her. And then we had Father Luke up in a monastery. Father Luke's from Philadelphia, right? And so I said, well, what's Father Luke doing now? And so I landed up in the monastery, and they're all fascinated. It's just I'm very social. See, when I was little, my mother left a lot, and so I had to go in the street and find my way. And I live exactly 3 blocks from where I was finding my way all my life.
Yeah,
everybody knows me. Like, I used to eat all my meals in Famous, Famous Deli.
Yes, of course.
Cross me, feed me. My father would come home from work and pay the bill. And so,
but it's all that early experience makes such great, it puts you in a position to be able to really do this and be so open to these connections that you make with people around the world. Katie, I guess question for you, being, working in the area of photography, have you seen, or just, in all your studies and research, do you feel like there's an interest in vintage and historical photography? Do you find more people following photographs, more, say, of our younger generations interested?
Yeah, I think historic photography processes are coming back because people are more interested in like a tactile version of photography than compared to like digital photography. But I sort of like to blend the two. Like maybe I'll take a Polaroid and then scan it and then print it really big digitally. So I think it's an interesting mix of using old photos and new technology in that way. So I think that's exciting for historical images. I think a lot of artists reference historical photos in their own work and incorporate it into new work.
And they're not altered. Like the new things are altered. Mm-hmm. It's no longer true. The photograph is not true. I mean,
well, that's what you were saying, Katie, about the photograph I'm sitting in front of. Is there's nothing changed there. I mean, it is what it is.
That's sort of one thing I learned from working with Jeanette and learning about archiving is like the photos that Alexander Artway printed himself are much more valuable than, say, if I were to scan something and make a reprint of it, because it has the artist's touch and his perspective and just everything he organized and put albums together, sequencing photos, all the ephemera, everything together makes it a little more special and more valuable because you really understand the artist's perspective.
What went into it. Yeah. And you spoke before about, or earlier in an earlier conversation we had about just how much time it took to set the photo up,
right?
To get it right. There's a question here. Jeanette, did your father practice architecture? And if so, did his buildings survive?
Well, that's very interesting. I also, before I answer that, I want to mention Stephen Perloff helps us a lot. He has a special newspaper, so that gets us information, what's going on. He's been very helpful. You just sort of get little feelings like that. A lot of people are very devoted. They give of their time and their money. So my father came to Philadelphia from New York around 1938, 39. And he got, because it was during the Depression. So during the Depression, he was a merchant marine, even though he had an architecture degree. So he was hired by the Navy Yard to design ships. And then he was with the Army Corps of Army Engineers. Now he did do some buildings, but in Philadelphia, a couple, I think around 16th and Locust or something, he told me, and a couple in New York. But at that time, first of all, you couldn't get anywhere with a Russian name. So he had Artway. It was really a time when you just didn't want to have anything to know that anybody was ever Russian.
And his last name
was Artemiev.
Artemiev. Mm-hmm.
Alexander Andreevich Artemiev. So that was one. And then there was the architects were not looked upon as we look upon them today. Today, you want an architect for everything. It's a prestigious thing. Then they had to make sure the building stood up. It had to be strong. It wasn't like all that. Mm-hmm. So he didn't do too much architecture in Philadelphia. He did a couple, but he basically had to earn a living for us. And he did it by being part of the Corps of Army Engineers, where they built bridges and all kinds of levees. He knew all that sort of thing. That's where that went.
A question for you about, and a comment about the amazing resemblance between you and the photograph you held up earlier, Jeanette, your grandmother. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many photos were in those two suitcases, and what proportion of those photos are very, very good, would you say? Or Katie?
Well, we have about 3,000, and we have negatives and prints. The prints are mostly small because my father lived in a small room in New York.
Oh, yeah, I can show.
Katie's going to show you something.
Yeah.
Like this is an example of a print that he made. So.
Oh, it's beautiful. Where is it?
This
Luna Park or something. Isn't it Coney Island?
Coney Island.
Coney Island, yes.
So they're relatively small, and then he made even smaller ones, which a
lot of contacts.
Basically contact prints. It's like the same size as the negative. So Alice, who helped before me, she organized all his photos sort of in a new version of a contact sheet. But these are all his little tiny prints, which is like kind of, hard to see. So you really have to like inspect them and really look into them. And then once you scan the negatives, which somehow we have like all the negatives.
We have all the negatives with the contacts.
It's really amazing, like when you scan them, what you can see and all the detail, and you find other things that you can't really see from the contact prints.
When you were, going around and bringing, Jeanette, your earlier story about meeting with folks and showing them, and the consensus being these are very good. How did your eye decide which ones you were going to put in that portfolio that you took up to New York?
Believe me, I did not make a decision. I didn't know a thing. I just grabbed one of the albums that I thought I could carry. And that was that. I didn't learn anything until I put myself in Temple University, because I had graduated in 1964, of course, in English and theater. But I knew that I could study over there without too much expense, and it was nearby. So I chose this person named Miles Orville. I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. And I took his class in the history of photography. And that's when my eyes started to get open. But since I was older and I didn't learn that fast, I took it twice. And he was so nice. He let me stay there. Right. So that's my style. Like now I'm studying Russian. Well, I'm old to study Russian. Is really no joke. So I put myself in Bryn Mawr, right? They had some special going. I lasted 9 days.
Oh, Jeanette, why? Just a lot?
No, because it looked like it might work. They told me I was going to speak in a month. Well, that didn't work.
You better stick with the.
I had never gone away to college before, so that was a great adventure. I went to Bryn Mawr and got my,
I dropped her off there, and she wanted to stay at the college, and I was like, "Are you sure you want to stay?"
Well, what else was I going to do? They were going to it was intensive, Well, then that didn't work, so then I went to Temple, right? Because they were teaching Russian over there. I heard, so I went over there. I lasted 9 weeks. That was a better one.
Well, that seems like a fairly.
By that time I was beginning to know the alphabet.
Well, but now you have assist, right? You met.
Now the woman next door to me.
For serendipity, you have a translator.
Right. So things just sort of fall in place, like you just, you don't give up. That's the point. When everybody says no, you say, well, maybe. We'll see. Like,
I love the spirit, and I love your Katie, the way you say, well, she figures out the ideas and I just have to make it happen, I think that's a wonderful
another adventure. We want to go into Hungary and Croatia. And also I found that my photography is very similar more to Europeans. Like when we go to shows, it's the Europeans that seem to be interested in ours. But I'm American, so I would like to leave them here. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I go around asking people who wants them, and I learn a lot.
Well, what about Bella? Like, the very successful. It looks like from all of the photographs, which you have the photographs on the website, right? Of how many, just the people that came out to see the exhibition.
Yes. Well, I might give them a couple, but it's a little shaky around there. No sooner we get ready to go back and close the show, he has to do something with the airplanes. There we are, we're stuck again.
No, I mean, good points all. And there's a couple of galleries, you have galleries in Canada and also one in New York. There are still photos.
Right. Alan Klotz has Alan Klotz and Steve Bulger took the best. They told me straight. They were taking the very best. One took 65 and the other took 75. But pretty much, Stephen Bulger is very good. He knows a lot of stuff. And so does Alan. Alan is very, they both know a lot. So, and they both love like the vintage. They feel it, especially Alan. He knows all about salt prints. And we took a course with him too. We just go everywhere.
Well, that must make you both feel good that the very good ended up, that a significant portion of those photos are in the hands of someone here in America that will.
Yeah. I think they belong in America, but I don't know about New York because it's sinking. I kind of worry about that one.
Well, there's I don't know.
I like Philadelphia. Philadelphia's my city,
Sure. Yeah. Well,
I've been to the Athenaeum. I go around here and there. I don't know how long I have the energy to go around like this, but you leave them somebody who loves them, who wants to do something, who's not going to throw them in the trash.
It's kind of hard to find like libraries or museums who will take like a whole collection of photos because there's really not, it's expensive to store everything properly. And so we kind of want to spread them out, maybe.
We almost went to the Library of Congress, but I don't know, something happened there. Yeah. But that's a good spot.
Did you just call the top on that one?
No, I was sitting next to her somewhere. And my teacher, Miles Orville, said, oh, they belong to Beverly in the Library of Congress. And I was sitting next to this lady, and they called upon her and said, oh, Beverly.
It sounds very serendipitous, Jeanette, that your energy and your openness.
I think it comes because I've lived in the same neighborhood all my life. I know so much of this neighborhood, right? And I say to people, blah, blah, blah. They say, how do you know that? It's so obvious if you look.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm in your neighborhood here in South Philly, and it's, hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been
lots of history.
We were thinking of finding this woman, Lena, in Hungary, and I'm sure she has grandchildren. We'll give them some.
Lena was the woman that your father was companions with in New York. And came to Philadelphia with?
Oh, no. She was working in hotels in New York. Her husband was disabled, and she was working there, and she was sending money back. So every Sunday, they each lived someplace else, and they would go into all the New York parks and they would take pictures. And it's only the two of them. So they each took the other. I have no pictures of them together, except when my father took her back to her family because she wanted to go back. And this is 1937, which was most a disastrous time to go. But they each they amused themselves by taking pictures of each other in beautiful spots that my father would arrange, right? And so we have this like double situation.
Yeah. Oh, that would be wonderful if you could get some of those photos back to her family.
Yeah.
Well, I don't doubt it. It won't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. I have all the confidence in the world. Well, Jeanette Jimenez and Katie Tackman, thank you so much for this wonderful story. I feel like it's a beautiful combination of tracing your roots and of sticking to it and being open to what the universe sends you. And I think
they're shocked when somebody finds out, oh my God, my relative. It's like,
but it's important, right? I mean, doesn't it? It really. A lot of people during the pandemic were, myself included, really tracing way back to 1700s, but exactly what you pointed out, Jeanette, was the problem I had, that I would reach a certain place. It was fine on my father's side, but then my mother's side was a lot harder, and but with some extensive digging and whatnot. But it changes your life. Like, you see the people on Finding Your Roots, and they're just bowled over by what you discover. And it's so fabulous to watch that moment. But then when it happens for yourself, it's extraordinary, so I can.
All the photographs can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I just DNA. Somebody comes in with the same photographs.
Right. You don't even have to do the DNA test. I love the fact that you put it up on social media and then you were receiving.
Right.
Do you still have the suitcases, Jeanette?
No, I had to get rid of them because otherwise, if I filled them up, somebody would take them again. I think I have one though in the basement, but I don't put any photographs in them anymore.
Well, we'll use it as a prop in a future show fine. If that will have significance.
I got a lot of props for you.
I bet you do, and I'm going to keep this in mind. Okay. But that's the best kind of prop, the one that is imbued with a lot of history and a lot of love. Thank
you so much for showing us.
No,
that girl with photography, I just thought of it as a different art.
Yes. Well, the Emily Bruton Schilling, who's now out in Washington, and her father's artwork, and how important it was to her story and following her that path.
She did a beautiful job. She was very, very, she was so young when she lost him. At least I was 21, but she was 4. Yeah.
There's stories that I think really resonate with people because of the need to belong and to want to know where you're from and how to carry that on. And as you said, Jeanette, you find these photographs, and that's going to happen for people.
They all go through you. You're like the soothsayer or something. You're like the Cassandra,
the curator of, and the Cassandra, right? Of it all. Well, thank you both so very much, and I'm very excited to see where you land next, Jeanette. And
thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.
Right.
And thanks to all of you for joining us here this evening. We'll stay on the photography journey next week with Sonia Robeson and David Robeson, who is a playwright here in Philadelphia with plays being produced around the country. They'll come on together as partners in marriage and partners in art. Sonia is an actress who you've loved in many shows, IRC, and on many stages in Philadelphia. And she has a photography business, a lifelong interest in photography that she's been pursuing for many years, that was started by her older brothers giving her a camera, and she started a business called Sonia's Eye. And so now she gets to illuminate the beauty of actors and performers in the Philadelphia region. So we'll bring them both together for our anniversary show next Saturday at 5 p.m. I do hope that you'll join us. Thank you so much for being a part of Into the Absurd. Have a very safe and a very healthy week ahead.